Live on this Friday, Dan Graziano here, joined by Kevin Clark in studio, also Mina Kimes and Bill Barnwell for our Friday show. You already heard from Kevin a little bit, but he'll give you some updated thoughts on Cam Ward, because after an up-and-down rookie season, the first overall pick in the 2024 draft, got some pretty good news last week when the Titans used the fourth overall pick in the draft on Ohio State wideout Carnell Tate. New on NFL Live today, we head to Tennessee, where head coach Robert Saleh says there's plenty of room for growth for the young Titans offense.
They've all got a lot of work to do. You know, you got a new system, new coordinator, new position coaches. Cam, not even with the guys that have been here over the last year, from last year. You know, there's just a lot of work to be done, especially with any incoming rookie. And Carnell's got to go out. He's got to compete. He's got to prove that he belongs. He's got to prove that he deserves the ball. And it's going to start day one once he gets here.
Wide receiver certainly is something that Cam Ward and his development could use. He really struggled when targeting wide receivers last season. He ranked bottom 3 in the league in yards per attempt, completion percentage, and drops did Titans wide receivers. Titans also brought in Wan'Dale Robinson in free agency, so maybe a few more playmakers in that wide receiver room in Tennessee. Bill Barnwell, start us off today. What did you make of the Carnell Tate selection?
He fixes something that was a really big weakness for Tennessee last year, and that was their ability to separate from tight coverage. So when teams were pressing Tennessee's receivers last year at the line of scrimmage, Cam Ward only found an open receiver 17% of the time. That was the worst rate in football per the Next Gen stats. And so with Carnell Tate now, you're taking a piece away from opposing defensive coordinators. They knew in key situations last year, they could just press those receivers and they were going to win most of the time. Now you have a guy who can separate against man coverage, separate against press, win at the line of scrimmage, and then create intermediate and downfield with yards after the catch. So that's just taking one of those weapons away from defensive coordinators and giving Cam Ward something to work with.
Yeah, I agree with Bill. I think that the addition of Tate really helps the overall receiving group in terms of everybody falling into different places. I think it'll open up the run game as well. I know some Titans fans are disappointed that they didn't draft Jeremiah Love, who went 3rd overall. But I would argue that this run game could be quite solid this season. Starting with Tony Pollard. Did he have the most productive season? No. But Next Gen Stats has a stat I like to look at called rushing yards over expected per carry. And he averaged 0.5 rushing yards over expected per carry, which is not only quite good, it's better than the likes of Kenneth Walker III. Chase Brown in Cincinnati, and that's capturing what a running back is doing relative to expectations based on the blocking and position of defenders. I also think they added help in that room. You have Tyjae Spears, who was banged up last season, but they drafted Nicholas Singleton out of Penn State. A big, explosive back, not the greatest vision, but I think has upside and also is a good receiver, had nearly 1,000 receiving yards in college, is a good returner too. So when you take a step back and you look at the room as a whole, not only do I feel better about the wide receivers, I also feel better about this run game in Tennessee, which of course should help Cam Ward too.
You know, I mean, I have a stat too, and it's what Cam Ward led the league in last year, which is drops from his receivers that made me scream as loud as I possibly could, because this was a complete disaster zone in the receiving room last year. Cam Ward would make some unbelievable throw. He'd roll out to his right, throw a dot, and then it would just either be dropped or some misfortune. It was a complete misadventure the entire year. He has no excuses in that regard now. Wan'Dale Robinson's there to be a volume guy. Brian Daboll knows what he can do with that. And then Carnell Tate was basically the perfect pick when you consider that he's able to get separation down the field. His catch radius is massive. He's going to be a young quarterback's best friend. So that's how I look at this. Would I have taken Sonny Styles or someone like that in the top 5? Sure, I'd rather have that. But if you're going to have Tate in there, only 2 Power 2 or Power 4 conference receivers last year had more downfield receptions last year than Carnell Tate. He knows how to get open. He knows how to get open in zone. This is going to be a really good fit even early in the season.
Kevin, you said Cam Ward led the league the Titans receivers rather, in drops that made you scream from your couch. I'd like to quantify that, if possible. On deep throws, 20 yards or more, Cam Ward was 8th in precision pass rate, meaning balls that hit the receivers in stride or in their chest. The Titans receivers were 26th in drop rate. So there was a discrepancy between Cam Ward, what he was doing, and what the receivers are doing on the other end that I think might echo your emotions.
Yeah, I didn't get my next Clark Stats login. I got to check my email and make sure I picked that up somewhere. But you saw over and over again in this offense, Cam Ward knew where to go with the football. He was able to create out of structure, and the passes were accurate. He was throwing guys open. You had guys who were just covered. They were clamped by opposing defensive backs that if he wasn't throwing guys open perfectly, they were not getting the football. And so the upgrades here at receiver and hopefully the run game as well, just going to create a lot of space for Cam Ward to work in that he just didn't have as a passer last year.
New offensive coordinator, too, and Brian Daboll, who has said that Ward was a big factor in terms of him choosing the Titans' offensive coordinator job. Earlier this week, the Houston Texans rewarded linebacker Azeez Al-Shaair with a new 3-year, $54 million contract extension. New today on NFL Live, he reflected on the journey that led him to this point and the impact his family has had.
The last person I want to thank, I saved for last because I don't know if I'm going to cry or not, and I don't want to cry. Is my mother. Man. I wouldn't be the man that I am if it wasn't for you. Everything that I am is because of you. And to be a single mother of one child is tough. 2 children, that's tough. 3, 4, 5, so we talk about 8 children. And I'm no one. I'm nothing if I don't have you, and if I didn't have you through all those years getting me to this point. Every conversation we had, even to this day, I have to talk to you when anything is going on in my life. You're my best friend. You mean the world to me, and I can't repay you enough for the things you've done for me. Just truly grateful for you. I love you.
Illustrate how far he has come. Azeez posted the details of his first contract on Instagram, a deal he signed with the 49ers as an undrafted free agent. So going from the league minimum to a $54 million contract, and obviously very proud and feeling that deeply was Azeez Al-Shaair. Here's a look at the Texans' first 5 picks from this draft that just happened last week. 2 of them were interior linemen, including their first-round pick, Keelan Rutledge. They also took Marlon Klein, who's 6'6", 250 pounds, one of the better blocking tight ends in this draft, and that's after signing tackle Braden Smith and guard Wyatt Teller in free agency, and what is now become an annual tradition of the Texans completely overhauling their offensive line. Did they do enough up front to make this offense better?
Yeah, I want to say yes, but I am worried. You know what? No, I'm not worried, because if we were to run this back next year, I'm pretty confident I was skeptical with the last rebuild. And I'm going to say this, I'm more optimistic this time around because of the players. It's not just enough to overhaul your offensive line. The last time that Nick Caserio did this, I was not confident because of the players he chose. I think this time around, the Texans did make better choices. Braden Smith, coming from Indianapolis, has been a capable run blocker for most of his career, and I think a better pass protector, certainly in what they've seen at that position. And then they drafted, they focused on physicality in the offensive line, drafting Keelan Rutledge. And that took some people by surprise, perhaps, but I do think it echoes this emphasis on physicality, echoed, of course, by adding a tight end who can block. That was, frankly, missing last year, 29th in run block, 30th in pass block win rate. The offensive line wasn't good enough. So I feel like the worst thing the Texans could have done is to try nothing. They did another overhaul. Time will tell if it works. I do feel better about it this time around.
I agree. The talent on paper is better than it was last season. Just a little nervous that those necessarily players aren't going to fit quite the way you would hope. Braden Smith's a good player, but he hasn't played a full season since 2022. Trent Brown, the swing tackle, hasn't played a full season since 2019. Wyatt Teller, a very good run blocking guard for a long time. Benched last year, kind of playing in a rotational role by the end of the year in Cleveland. And then Keelan Rutledge. I think if they have their best 5 on the field, they're planning on him playing center. He was taking snaps at center during the pre-draft process. This is a guy who played guard his entire career at the college level. So we've seen with other teams, the Rams did it with Steve Avila a couple of years ago, where they had a guard they liked, thought they'd move him to center, didn't work out, and it kind of threw the whole line into disarray for a year in Los Angeles. And so I'm excited about the pieces that if everyone's healthy and plays well, they have a shot. I just think there's injuries and fit concerns that maybe don't make it work quite as well in reality.
There was only one player in the NFL last year who was pressured more on the interior of the offensive line than C.J. Stroud last year. That was Justin Fields. He was with the Jets, and with all of these stats, the Jets simply don't count. So with Stroud, he's the biggest X factor in the league. If he gets back to what he was, the Texans win the Super Bowl. It's the easiest equation in the sport because of what this defense looks like. They added Caden McDonald, a big run-stuffing defensive tackle who doesn't really get a lot of quarterback pressures, but you don't need that with the way the rest of the defense is built. I like the moves they are making. The question is, C.J. Stroud has looked very uncomfortable, especially at the end of last season. He was the first player in history to have as many turnovers as he did, 5 interceptions, 5 fumbles in one postseason. You got to get back to 2 years ago. You win the Super Bowl. That's it. It's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. That is the biggest question for me.
Yeah, I think with Stroud, what's kind of forgotten is that he was quite good during the regular season. Things just fell apart in the postseason. And what we're all doing right now is trying to figure out what happened, quite frankly, especially in that last game. And I think from an organizational standpoint, focusing on the offensive line is probably the best thing you can do to ensure that doesn't happen again with Stroud, to your point. I'll add another player we didn't bring up, David Montgomery. You know, the run game was not good last season as well. Yep. It was neither efficient nor explosive. But I'm interested in seeing if he can help out in pass protection as well, because that was an issue like the rest of the offensive line that Houston struggled with.
Yeah, Stroud has been pressured on 34% of his dropbacks over the last 2 seasons. That ranks him 24th in the NFL. We're just getting
it gives me as a runner, just being able to stretch the defense and puncture, as they say, and just allow the linemen to do what they do and get up to the second level on the double teams. I really like to see it develop, and I'm pretty good at keeping my shoulders square once I get to the line of scrimmage. So I love all the run plays, but it just happens to be, at Notre Dame we did a little mixture of mid zone and outside zone, and that just was what I was pretty good at.
Mina, you agree with his assessment of how he fits in Seattle?
Yeah, this is a fantastic scheme fit. Pardon me. Jadarian talked about it there. He's excellent on those zone runs, the way he explodes out of his cuts. If you give him any room at all to maneuver, he's an explosive play waiting to happen. I think for Seattle, the biggest risk here is not the player, the scheme fit. It's just the fact that we've seen so little of him. Didn't have a single college game with more than 15 touches, and that's because he backed up the running back who went 3rd overall. But there's a little bit of projection involved. Now, on the other side, we're talking about a running back who hasn't run a lot. Sometimes that can be a good thing because he doesn't have much tread on his tires. But it'll be interesting to see if he can carry more of a workload in Seattle, because he's going to have to.
He is, with Ken Walker off to Kansas City and Zach Charbonnet still recovering from that ACL injury he suffered in the divisional round against the 49ers. And that's where we go next, to San Francisco, where Kyle Shanahan was on the Rich Eisen show this week and described his scouting process and the ways in which it's a little bit different than most head coaches.
I pick up that tape for the first time in February. I don't usually know who the Heisman is or anything like that at that time. I've just been 100% NFL ball, and it's hard to catch up with all those guys, so you got to depend on a lot of other people. One way we do it here is, we give all the position coaches, a responsibility to make highlight tapes on everybody, and I tell them, they got to watch a lot of game tape to make those highlight tapes, and then I study their highlight tapes so I can study 200 people, and I always tell them if I don't like their highlight tape, then I'm not going to watch anything after.
Bill Barnwell, your thoughts?
I believe Kyle Shanahan knows who the Heisman Trophy winner is in February. I'm a little skeptical of that one. But I do believe that there's some element to this that's actually a positive. When you talk to scouts in the NFL, more often than not, when you talk about coaches being influenced and having a say, it's a negative thing. Coaches kind of coming in late and falling in love with guys. They don't really do their due diligence. That's something that scouts don't like. So from an organizational perspective, there's some value in saying, hey, let's have a coach be involved in this process. Let's trust our scouts. Let's trust our positional coaches. Let's trust that whole process and then have the coach be kind of the last voice in, as opposed to having it be a significant voice throughout the entire process. Being an NFL coach is a full-time job.
Yeah, a little unorthodox, but it has worked out pretty well for the 49ers since Kyle's been there. Things have gone all right. This is an interesting one from Kevin Clark's podcast, where Chiefs general manager Brett Veach was asked by Kevin,
you got to double check everything when Howie calls. If Howie calls and says, I want this guy, and you're about to get rid of him, you have to say, wait, why am I getting rid of him? Because he understands when to take a flyer on guys. He knows how to, it's traits-based. He likes to take athleticism, bet on that if a guy maybe didn't work with his first team. So that's why I think every GM should have a little bit of pause when the Eagles call about a guy. They're obsessed with value. They know how to play the draft board. They know how to let guys come to them, not overthink things, and they always go best player available. That's why they always have one of the best rosters in the sport. That's why they're always going to compete, is because Howie Roseman knows how to play every facet of roster building, and that is not common in this league. When Howie calls, be nervous.
Yeah, when I think about Howie Roseman's success, I think about a quote that I ran into back when I covered finance, which was, and I don't even remember who said it, big shots are little shots who keep shooting. It's kind of Howie Roseman. He just takes a lot of shots and he keeps trying, even though it's not always successful. Yeah. But a lot of times it is. I think about the trades he's made in the draft, and according to Next Gen Stats, as GM, he's averaged 3.5 trades per draft, which is the third most of any GM, and the volume is the first most because he's been doing it for so long. And you think back to, 2021, maneuvering down with Miami, then back up for Devontae Smith, clearly a win. 2022, the big trade with the Saints, where he got picks that became Jalen Carter and Cooper DeJean, obviously a win. Bodes well for the trade to go up and get Mekhi Lemon, by the way, right, given his recent history. Also, trades outside of the draft, Kevin, you alluded to, the A.J. Brown one being, of course, the most famous. And look, they're not always wins. Jahan Dotson, that's, third rounder, but there's a willingness to keep trying both during the draft and in season that I think has ultimately yielded a pretty great track record of success. And so I do understand why someone might have reticence if he gives them a call.
We all agree Howie Roseman is a great GM, and yet when you think about who teams are hiring as general managers, how often are they going out and getting someone who has a resume or a profile like Howie Roseman? This is a league that still values player evaluation more than player valuation for their general managers. You see teams hire former coaches like John Harbaugh, who's now basically running the ship in New York. Former players like Matt Ryan. Ian Cunningham was with Matt Ryan in Atlanta, a former scout. The Packers now having sending scouts around the NFL to be GMs in Miami. This is a league that does not really value that archetype for some reason. Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, one of the few guys who does have a Howie Roseman kind of resume, 18 games over 500, gets fired by the Vikings, which seems a little crazy to me. Howie Roseman is not a former player, not a former scout, not a former coach, a guy who came up running the salary cap with the Eagles before working his way up. So I wonder if teams might be more inclined to go after that kind of archetype. Howie Roseman continues to have success.
I don't know if they will, Bill. And here's why. It's a hard position to evaluate. I think that even Howie Roseman, he got demoted by Chip Kelly, and they sent his analytics department to the marketing department. Yeah. They literally sent him to a different building and said, get out of here, and he had to go learn from Steve Kerr for a year. Literally, that's what happened to him. And so I think that that's the hardest thing is if you're going to have a guy like Howie Roseman, it took a while for him to establish himself as the best GM in football. It took him a while for his value board, his value system to work, to understand how to play the draft board. He made some mistakes early. He's drafted guys like Jalen Reagor that obviously did not end up working. So I think it's a really hard thing to say we're going to go out and hire a Howie Roseman type because you also have to invest and understand you're going to have to give the Howie Roseman type time. And guess what? Owners hate giving guys time.
Yeah, but it's worked out for Jeffrey Lurie and the Eagles.
Yes, it has.
Including playoffs. Only the Chiefs and Bills have a better record the last 10 overall. Then there were 4 more taken in round 2 and 4 more in round 3. Bill Barnwell, any idea why?
It all goes back to Sean McVay, and it goes back to earlier this season when Puka Nacua got hurt and missed that game against the Jaguars. Rams have always been an 11 personnel team. 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers. In that game with no Nakua, though, Sean McVay found something that he liked. They went to 13 personnel with 3 tight ends on the field for 24 snaps. And even when Nakua came back, McVay suddenly changed his offense. They would run 13 personnel once or twice a season in years past. They ran it 45% of the time from that point forward, 3 times as much as anybody else in football. And there's a lot of things 13 personnel can do for you. It makes the defense make a tough choice because defenses want to live in nickel these days, keep the fast defensive backs on the field. If you do that, well, you're going to be physically overwhelmed. And the Rams were the most efficient run game in football because they were facing light boxes with that 13 personnel. And then when they threw the ball, they were efficient throwing against those tight ends. You can't run the same exotics, the same blitzes because you're facing different personnel groupings. You have your base defense on the field. You don't have as many exotics running out of there. The nub tight ends like the Rams are showing. You only have so many ways to look at that. And so they were only getting so many looks on the defensive side of the ball. And that gives McVay the opportunity to take advantage of what he knows is coming. And so Rams really found ways to attack teams with 13 personnel.
Guess what else can be traced back to Sean McVay? James Gladstone, the Jaguars general manager who comes from Los Angeles, comes from the Les Snead Sean McVay tree. And this pick of Nate Borkature from Texas A&M is emblematic of the entire run on tight ends in the middle rounds of this draft. Everybody thought it was a reach. I thought it was a reach. Obviously, this is part of the cyclical nature, you mentioned it, Bill, of the sport where the quote goes, big people beat up little people, but also defenses are getting smaller. They want to have smaller linebackers who can cover. They want to have big nickels, as they call them, on the field. 5 defensive backs, 6 defensive backs. What do? You throw big bodies at them, and that's what teams want to do here. So they want to get big. They want to run through these smaller defenses. But I think it's cyclical, and it only lasts a couple of years before we're going back to the 5 wide, 4 wide, spread them out type of offenses. But I thought there were a lot of reaches in the middle rounds. I thought that the run on those guys in the middle rounds kind of spooked teams and got them to where they drafted guys 2 or 3 rounds too early. I wouldn't have participated in it if I was a GM. It's a hard position to evaluate. I think a lot of guys are going to regret taking tight ends this early.
So we started NFL Live last season by talking about the fact that in 2024, tight end usage was at an all-time high. It went up again in 2025. 27% of the time, teams had either 12 personnel or 13 personnel, so 2 or 3 tight ends on the field, which is the most ever since True Media has been tracking the data. I think what I found fascinating about this draft was not just the number of tight ends drafted, but the types of tight ends, almost the trend within the trend. Because after Kenyon Sadiq and Eli Stowers, who's almost like a big slot, he's super athletic, there was a real run not just on tight ends, but on wide tight ends who can block in line. You know, we talk about reaches, Burkhardt, the Jags tight end, Oscar Delp, Kazmarek out of Ohio State comes to mind as well. Sam Roush out of Stanford, who's a tremendous blocker. And it was clear to me that a lot of these teams weren't just seeking tight ends. They were seeking tight ends who can actually block so that they can create the kind of mismanages that Bill talked about. Because I think a lot of teams already have tight ends that they like, but not a lot of teams have the variety of body types that they needed. So it's evident to me, looking at this draft, many teams put a priority on that specific archetype of tight end, and that's what led to the result.
Yeah, I do wonder if we're going to look back and say the move tight ends made a bigger difference on those blocking tight ends just because of how the Rams used their tight ends last season. So the Rams are really good at a 13 personnel, better EPA per play than they had with any other personnel grouping. The rest of the league, when they use 13 personnel, not so much. 28th in EPA per play when they went and used 13 personnel. Not ideal. And so what you're looking at here is what I think the Rams did differently is how explosive they were. They took shots downfield. They would run Terrence Ferguson 20 yards downfield. Matt Stafford would throw him an ISO ball to try and get stuff up. You would see them get Puka Nacua downfield. It was more about creating explosive plays than about having blockers you trusted and getting the run game going in there. So I do think you want to have the variety of fits, but I think the best offenses in 13 are going to be the ones attacking downfield and throwing to their tight ends.
22 tight ends taken in this year's draft. That's the most since 24 went in the 2002 draft. New on NFL Live, we got back to Chiefs GM Brett Veach, who joined the Pat McAfee Show to talk about why he felt the need to trade up to number 6 overall and draft cornerback Mansour Delane.
we looked at the Saints and we're like, gosh, man, they're down a bunch of corners. We're down a bunch of corners. Washington's not trading. So if you want this guy, you got to go to 6 because the Saints aren't going to trade. But that was the guy we wanted. We had him as a top 5 player, and we didn't Zoom him till maybe the day or two before the draft. I mean, we waited till the last minute on everything, and we just wanted to not show our hand. And I think we took some people by surprise. But I think if you really looked at our roster, it probably didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that when a team loses, their number 1 and number 2 corner, a corner might be need. He's the best corner in the draft.
Kansas City traded up to number 6 overall to take Delane. It's the first time that the Chiefs traded into the top 10 since 2017 when they went up to get Patrick Mahomes at 10 overall. That worked out pretty well for them. They took defenders with each of their first 4 picks. Third time in Andy Reid's head coaching career that one of his teams used each of its first 4 picks in a single draft on defensive players. So, Mina, when you look at what the Chiefs have done in terms of overhauling their defense this offseason, is there one particular move that stands out for you?
Yeah, Delane was not surprising, as Ravich talked about. Need, best player available, you get it. Peter Woods, the second player they took in the draft, also in the first round, though, that was intriguing to me because this defensive line has been so dependent on Chris Jones getting pressure. Last year, Jones was first amongst all NFL defense tackles in pass rush win. No other Chiefs defensive tackle ranked in the top 50. So it's apparent they're really hoping to get some juice on the inside with Woods, who is very quick off the line of scrimmage, very disruptive. He just doesn't finish super well, and I think that's why he didn't go earlier in the draft. But you can easily imagine them kicking Chris Jones to edge like they've been and hoping that Woods can bring some pressure, even if he's not getting to the quarterback, at least disrupting the pocket in a way that will be helpful to their pass rush.
Yeah, Chris Jones gets to choose where he wants to go a fair amount of the time in Kansas City. He's going to have help with him up front this year, and I wonder if that makes the Chiefs change how they approach defense early in the season. They use the high picks on Mason Thomas, on Peter Woods. They get Felix Anudike-Uzomah back. You have Chris Jones and George Karlaftis. They have a deeper pass rush and a deeper defensive line than they've had before. And last year, Steve Spagnuolo's blitzes weren't as effective as they usually are. They were below average in QBR and below average in sack rate when they were sending extra pressure at the quarterback. So they did get Mansour Delane in. They signed Kadir Kohu. That's a rebuilding secondary. That's going to take some time to kind of gel in. And I wonder if maybe they take some of the heat off those rushes, don't blitz quite as often early in the year, trust the defensive line to get home, and maybe later in the year, when they feel more confident about the secondary, maybe that's when we get more of these exotic Spags blitzes.
All right, good news and bad news. Good news is I liked these picks. I think that trading up for Mansour Delane when you're never going to be an opportunity if you're the Chiefs to draft the top cornerback in the market again, that's smart process. And then Peter Woods, the problem with him in college was consistency, and you're hoping you get a little more of it at the college level because when he was as good as anybody in the country. The bad news is I still don't see a roster that's going to be able to tread water during Mahomes' rehabilitation process. If that takes a couple of weeks, a couple of months, we'll see what happens. Remember, the injury was in December. It's serious, so we'll see what the rehab process is. But they need him early, and they need him healthy, and they need him back to what he was a couple of years ago. Because right now I'm looking at this roster, I don't see the type of roster that's going to overcome enough if Justin Fields is a starter for 5 or 6 weeks.
Mahomes has said he's aiming for a week 1 return from that December knee surgery. Obviously, we'll see as the offseason goes along how that turns out. Coming up, regional tournaments. On trend now, let's stay in Green Bay and check out some of the trends around the league. Packers saw a lot of defensive talent leave the building this offseason. Jonathan Gannon is the new defensive coordinator after Jeff Hafley left to coach the Dolphins. Green Bay also lost linebackers Rashawn Gary, Quay Walker, and Kingsley Enagbare. And Micah Parsons, recovering from injury, not expected to be ready for the start of the 2026 season. So, Mina, did the Packers bring in enough help to overcome all of that?
I don't think so, but they need a couple of things to happen to make it all right. One, Micah Parsons has to be immediately impactful when he comes back. I don't know if there's a more load-bearing player in the entire NFL than him as part of that pass rush. And then the other thing is they need their draft picks to be impactful immediately, quite frankly. The cornerback room is thin. Brandon Cisse out of South Carolina was their first pick this year. And then the nose that they drafted, Chris McClellan, that is going to be a need in Jonathan Gannon's scheme. So if one of those players can be a plus starter right away, I feel a lot better better about this Packers defense, but Parsons remains the most important player, frankly, on the team outside of Jordan Love.
No doubt about that. To Cincinnati next, where last season the Bengals defense allowed an average of 2.1 yards after contact anytime somebody touched the ball, rushing or receiving. Now you say, Dan, is that a lot? And I say, yes, it's the highest by any defense in the last 20 years, which is as far back as we have that data. So between free agency and the draft, Bill Barnwell, did the Bengals do enough to fix that?
Major steps in the right direction. They allowed 170 missed tackles last year, 39 more than anybody else in football. And some of the moves they made were just about getting rid of the worst defenders. Geno Stone had a 20% missed tackle rate last year. They replaced him with Brian Cook, 4.5% missed tackle rate. That's a big step in the right direction. Boye Mafe, very solid on the edge in terms of tackling. And then you bring in Dexter Lawrence, Cassius Howell. If that pass rush and that run defense is getting home quicker, less space for those guys to move around, runners at the second level, maybe easier to make those tackles. So better tacklers and better tackling angles to come in 2026.
To Los Angeles now, where last year the Chargers' offensive line was dreadful, thanks in large part to injuries. They ranked last in pass block win rate and next to last in run block win rate. So, Kevin, are the offseason moves the Chargers have made along the offensive line enough to reverse that trend?
Well, they started 30 different offensive line combinations last year. Dan Graziano, was that a lot?
It sounds like a lot.
It is a lot. It was the most in the NFL last year. They threw resources at the problem, drafted 4 guys in the draft who can play interior offensive line. Obviously, Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt hopefully are healthy, but I love everything about what they're doing this offseason. I think that Jim Harbaugh understands that the game is won in the trenches. You also add Akeem Mesidor on the defensive line there. So I think they're rowing in the right direction. Slaughter, their first offensive line pick from Florida, can play right away in the interior. I think they're doing everything the right way. They're real deal AFC contenders.
They drafted 4 offensive linemen, and most they've drafted in a single draft since 1991.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's
Next
a lot.
on NFL Live, Cowboys rookies went to minicamp today, and now the question is, do all of the defensive moves Dallas made in the draft